Okay. Why is innovation so important in the energy sector?
Yeah. Well, first I'll start with a definition of what innovation is. So it's really the creation, the improvement, and the adoption of new technologies. And when I say technologies, it's really general. So it can include hardware, but also software, new business models, new systems, new forms of behavior. So I start with a pretty general definition of innovation. And then why is it important? Well, innovation allows us to make a transformation of the energy system in a way that's affordable. So in the near term, we can meet targets on energy efficiency or on climate change or other environmental goals and do it in an affordable way. And then in the long term, if what we need to do is really transform the energy system to almost completely decarbonize the economy, well, then it's only possible if we create and widely adopt new technology. So what I like to say is that innovation, the process of creating and improving technologies, allows us to transform the energy system so that it's technically possible, so that it's economically affordable, and so that it's politically feasible.
Mm-hmm. Regarding solar photovoltaics, should we use R&D or market pull measures?
Yeah, so on photovoltaics, if you look historically, it's really been a mix of technology push of research and development and then on demand side measures. So in the 1970s and the 1980s, in response to the oil crises, there was a lot of investment around the world in developing and improving photovoltaics. Since the early 2000s, and specifically in 2004 in Germany, it's really been almost completely about demand pull, about creating markets for photovoltaics by subsidizing them. And that's created this market effect where the market got larger, production scale got much, much larger. And so we had gigantic economies of scale, a lot of it happening in China and other parts of Asia, where these gigantic billion euro size investments for new factories that have dramatically reduced the cost of PV modules. And at the same time, we have more locally learning by doing so that the cost of installing them, of going onto roofs, of making electrical connections, has also fallen. So it's been a combination of earlier R&D and in the later stages a market pull that's led to the whole world now having access to really cheap photovoltaics. Where we go from here, photovoltaics can still get cheaper. Because we have such a large market now, there are strong incentives for private sector to invest in their own R&D to improve them. But there's still space for some public R&D to generate new designs, new materials that eventually could replace the existing photovoltaics. So there's a private sector has a big role to play here as well. Probably what we need more than anything now, though, are new business models, a way to regulate or create markets for electricity that don't depend on large centralized generation, but can integrate and reward investments for decentralized production of photovoltaics because they are becoming so much more affordable now.
Mm-hmm. And how can governments support technologies at the demonstration phase?
Yeah, so the demonstration phase of technologies is important, but also difficult. So it's important because you've got this stage in between the research, basic research, R&D phase, and then the market deployment phase, where the technology risks are still high. The private sector may have weak incentives to invest because there may be spillovers. For example, if they make an investment in a demonstration, their competitors can see what happens and then use that information to decide whether they want to build their own demonstration plant or not. And so if everybody does that, there's an incentive to wait and see, and there's underinvestment. So there's a need for some kind of investment and probably some public investment at the demonstration phase. It's important because it's also called the valley of death. So that's where you've got the bursts of new technologies. They become technically feasible. They're not quite ready for commercial markets because they haven't been proven. Initial adopters may be risk averse and maybe not willing to deal with the questionable reliability or be willing to put big sums into buying the first one. And so that creates this problem where you need this extra investment to get over the valley of death and get over to the other side. The tricky thing is, if you look historically, governments have not done a good job of dealing with the potentially the political issues of supporting technologies in this stage. In the US, it's been called the technology pork barrel, where it turns out to be politicians maybe trading favors with each other and trying to return some investment to their districts. And that's not necessarily the best outcome for technology. So what we're trying to do now is learn from previous case studies to see what has done well, and so what governments could do. There's a few things that seem to be emerging from that. One is milestone payments, so having stages at which you can evaluate and decide not to continue. A second is to have a portfolio. A third is to sometimes need to concentrate investments instead of spread them around, because there may be scale effects that you need to test out. So we're working on some of the things that seem to have worked well. Competitive bidding might be another one. But I think the one that seems to be missed the most in previous demonstration projects from governments is the objective. And the objective is not always to prove that a technology works so that everyone can adopt it. It's also to learn. And so there's a bit of experimental aspect to deploying a first of its kind, large scale, whatever it is, technology. And so it's important to design that into the program so that information about how it works is codified, is written down, is put in reports, and is also widely distributed, is not considered proprietary information by the companies, because ultimately we want to create knowledge from creating these demonstration projects to inform the next project, or to inform commercial deployment, or to be able to ultimately proliferate the technology around the world if it's an environmentally beneficial one. So learning is important.